Okay, now joining us from San Francisco is Ying Ying Lu. She is the co-host of TechBuzz China Podcast by Pandaily. Ying Ying, thanks very much for joining us. I really enjoyed Francis's story there. Take us into the mind of the consumers in China. Why is VR so popular right now?
So the statistic of 3,000 VR experience stores, you call them VR arcades in the clip that just played, but VR experience stores are largely in cities, large cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen. I definitely think that what's lagging behind is actually the technology side. So people definitely are very intrigued by the content. These immersive experiences are an interesting way to pass time per se, but in terms of widespread adoption to other tiered cities as well as further applications beyond gaming education, I think 5G is actually going to be a big game changer for China on the global market.
Well, let's pick up on that. How is 5G going to change the playing field? Because we saw all those folks in the movie theater, and who wouldn't want to turn around and say a Titanic or something like that and see what's going on behind them?
Sure. So 5G itself, I would say three major ways. In terms of the technology, it's going to speed up and sort of lower latency. So actually for someone like myself, I experience a bit of nausea when I put on current VR headsets, whether made in China or even in the US. And I think that 5G will really sort of diminish that and allow for the typical consumer to be able to feel much more comfortable in using them. It's actually also going to increase reliability of the technology itself. In addition, it's going to speed sort of the drive or the shift to cloud and allow for more processing power to actually shift to the cloud. So what that means is essentially an exponential sort of potential for there being a tipping point and mass adoption from a consumer market perspective as well.
Pretty amazing. And you think about the disposable income that China's growing middle class has. Who are the average consumers? You talked about the tier 1 cities, so they're clearly in the areas where there's more money.
Yeah, so I think maybe for the immersive experiences that is true, but if you look at the scale of China and who the major internet players are and what they're investing in VR as not just a technology, but in terms of tech plus the content itself. So the big players in China internet, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, I can tell you Tencent has added an entire VR sort of department as part of its gaming division. Baidu itself, through iQIYI, its video portal, has an entire substation that is focused exclusively on VR content. And Alibaba, we talked about retail, they have added VR to some of its own sort of retail experiences offline.
Okay, so what is behind China's leading VR growth worldwide?
So, well, first, I think your statement of leading VR growth worldwide, I can get to that later. But
too much?
Definitely, yeah, definitely the government's push. So I think, in China, the way I see China and the US comparing, for example, China definitely has a lot of government support for VR. It's one of the top initiatives that the government actually laid out at a national level for its 13th five-year plan that lasts until 2020. So both from the national directive level as well as local governments itself. For example, there's a city called Nanchang that states from its own statement that it wants to be the world's very first VR city. So I don't see any other city in the US kind of making that bold of a statement. But so government support is one aspect. But I think as a comparison, the US is still much more content focused. It has much more of a mature ecosystem for developing content, the cultural aspects of that community around content creation, as well as real tech innovation that allows for, I would say, higher quality hardware that comes out of the US. So China might have the market, it might have the scalability, you might be able to sell 1.5 million devices as some VR companies in China have, but then you'll have consumers complaining about the quality of their experience on your devices.
Interesting, interesting. Well, we will definitely check back in with you. Ying Ying Lu, as always, thanks very much for your insight. We appreciate it.